Hello. Good afternoon. I'm Dan Vera with AWP's Board of Directors. We're delighted to bring this extraordinary event to you today in partnership with CantoMundo. Please help me extend a warm welcome and thank you to the organizers of CantoMundo for their support in bringing these great literary presenters to the conference. Before we start, there are a few housekeeping items. Please silence your cell phones. Remember, there's no flash photography allowed during the presentation. Respect seats marked as reserved for attendees with accessibility needs. Please give the authors about 15 minutes after the presentation to get to the book signing table before approaching them to have your book signed. Lastly, and importantly, we ask that you please be aware of your fellow attendees who may have disabilities and help AWP be more accessible. If you see a barrier to accessibility, let us know by calling or texting our accessibility hotline at 210-664-2062. Please also be aware of those with invisible disabilities and do not question someone's use of an accommodation. Thank you. And now it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome Celeste Mendoza Guzman, co-founder and co-director of CantoMundo.
Hello, y'all. Welcome, welcome. We are still surviving and standing. Thank you for being here. I wanted to just say a real quick note that this is my and Deborah's hometown. And yes, and some of y'all here también, it's your hometown. And my niece actually danced on this stage in a tutu, a leotard, and some other crazy costume about 7 years ago. There was a few more people in the audience than today, but you know, that's all right, that's all right. And I'm gonna tell her that her tia got to grace the stage after her. She was first, so thank you all for being here. This panel is gonna be in celebration of 10 years of CantoMundo. And it was actually more than 10 years ago at an AWP in Austin, Texas, which I think was one of the last times AWP was in the South, that Pablo Miguel Martinez and I were on the lawn of the state capitol, taking a break from the panels and the readings and the bar to talk about the fact that the night before, when we were at a gathering of about 25 Latinx writers, that they were pretty much the only Latinx writers that we had been seeing at that year's AWP and at the previous ones that we had attended. The reason for this was not because there was a lack of talented Latinx writers or that there weren't published Latinx writers. Latinx in the US have been writing and publishing for over a century, but we have rarely had access to spaces like AWP. Historically, our books were not published by mainstream presses that were able to garner critical reviews that led to potential teaching jobs or visiting writer positions. Pablo and I, and many of those other 25 Latinx writers, knew about this machine, this system, that whether purposefully or not, excludes, especially for many poets. We talked about how Kaveh Khanum and Kundiman had created spaces for Black and Asian American poets, respectively, how as a result, their community of poets, in particular at AWP, in the publishing world, as well as the literary prize world, was growing. And we wanted that presence and that visibility for Latinx poets. We also talked about the most important aspect of the community that they were building and that they were finding one another. They were supporting one another. They were challenging one another. You could see them at AWP hugging, laughing, enjoying one another. And their poetry was incredibly crafted, cogent to our current times, and true. We talked with other Latinx poets, and they too were asking the same question as us. Where is the Latinx Kaveh Khanum and Kundiman? Now, there had been communities of Latinx poets before, on one coast or another, and in towns like this one, San Antonio, which has a long literary history. The Inter-American Book Fair, the Guadalupe Cultural Arts Center, Gemini Inc., Macondo, among others. But we wanted one with a national scope, specifically for Latinx poets, that worked to bring us together, to refine our craft, leverage one another's knowledge of the Poe biz, and most of all, to build connections and love. CantoMundo was founded here in San Antonio, Texas. The founders are Norma Y. Cantú, Carmen Tafoya, Pablo Miguel Martinez, Deborah Paredes, and me. We met at Norma's kitchen table, where many revolutions have begun. But the community is what makes the organization, and the community is presente. Presente here at AWP, presente in literary magazines like Poetry and others, presente in the actual and virtual book fair out there, presente in prizes, and presente right here. Today we will hear from one of our faculty members, Rigoberto Gonzalez, who serves on the AWP board and is chairing this year's AWP. Deborah Paredes, co-founder and co-director for 10 years with me of CantoMundo, whose second book, Year of the Dog, premieres tonight. And Malcolm Friend, yes, Malcolm Friend, CantoMundo fellow, whose collection, Our Bruises Kept Singing Purple, received the 2017 Hillary Gravendick Prize. I'm going to ask them a few questions, and we will hear some of their work. And then hopefully there'll be time for some questions from the audience. So let's begin. Each of them are going to talk for about 7 minutes. And as some of the CantoMundistas know, I'm an avid timekeeper. It's one of my favorite things to do. So I will be making sure that we stay on time. So you all, there has been some controversy over the publication of American Dirt by Janine Cummings. And for many, it has reopened conversations about how Latinx voices and bodies are received or not received in the U.S. What does this moment mean for you? Deborah.
Thank you, Celeste. And thank you, everyone, for being here. I think that, as you said, the controversy surrounding the publication and even the pre-publication, I would say, the process by which the publication of American Dirt happened, reopens, right, conversations that we have been having, certainly within Latinx communities, for many, many years. I think that I'm less interested in talking, per se, about the book and the author, and more about the kind of processes that facilitate these kinds of events. I think that for me, I'm really interested in thinking about what are the Latino writers and Latina writers who've been doing this work for some time, writing about issues on the border, writing about immigrant experiences, among them, you know, sitting right next to me, right? And how we might continue to bring those voices to the forefront, how we might acknowledge that those are not voices that often, and those are not writers who often get compensated in the same way that American Dirt got compensated. And I'm not against, for the record, right, I want people to get paid, and I want people to be able to write about whatever they want to write about. So it's less for me an issue of authenticity and much more an issue of understanding one's relationship to power, understanding the need. I think it brings up for us again the ways in which the publishing industry, right, and the kind of find, I think, Latino writers illegible, in many ways. I think, I've talked quite a bit with other writers of color around even just the process of when you're sort of pitching your book, and how you have to present a list of comparables, right? When you are marketing your idea or pitching your idea, and that often the comparables, if you present, let's say, other Latino writers or something, they aren't seen as marketable. Right? And so that even embedded in the very system by which we even get to the contract, there are real structural problems that I think is important for us to highlight and begin to push for a radical change around. I think that to me is a bigger issue at play, is how to make some fundamentally structural changes so that the actual output is reflective of the very diverse readership, right? Because we do read in more than one language, and we do write in more than one language. And so I think for me, that's one of the issues that I'm certainly invested in paying attention to. And in the ways that, in some ways it's been so tiresomely predictable, right?
Yeah.
Signifying, Latinx experience by, what barbed wire means, right? Or, signifying these kinds of things are, it's like, wow, we're here again. But again, I'm more interested in thinking through how to use the moment to call for structural changes, I think is the most important.
Thank you. Thank you. Rigoberto?
Well, I wish that we had Deborah be our leader in that conversation. There's so much that I felt was not being said or was not being articulated, and frankly, not being heard. There was a lot of noise around this book. There was a lot of divisiveness. Many of us got caught in that crossfire, and it wasn't very pretty. It wasn't very comfortable for many of us. My position, I'm going to hold to my position. Again, like Deborah, I'm not here about censoring an author or telling an author to not write what they want to write. But certainly there's accountability, there's responsibility, and I don't think that those two are mutually exclusive. But in terms of the conversation itself, I would rather, now that, because I enjoyed everything you said, I think I agree with everything, but my perspective is, and what I sent out on social media was that we need to also remember, as we're having this conversation about the unfairness, the disparities of attention and rewards in the big publishing house, we also have to celebrate those that are being published in the small houses. Yeah. Now, I'm an author that published everything in the small presses. Nothing I have ever done has been in the big houses, and I think I've done okay, But that was a journey that I decided to take and to hold on to and continue. And so as much as as much as we all want a piece of that pie, we have to remember that so many of us came from this other location that is now becoming more centered, because and I think it's important to find our books, find our voices, and find our career paths in the expansive landscape that's either the big press, small press, and celebrate both. I wish that the conversation about the American Dirt had not been about the money. I wish that it had not been about the woman's identity. That I wish it had been more about, what lessons can we take away from this? What language, what words are we going to express so that what we say is not misinterpreted as jealousy or is not misinterpreted as pettiness, but rather an invitation to have a fruitful conversation about what it means for us to be at the table. Right. There were loud voices. There were not so loud voices out there. All I can say is that I've been in business 20 years, and I know that some of those loud voices are not amplified, usually. That their time is going to be reduced considerably as we move on through these months, even weeks, and that I'm glad that after all is said and done, people like me who have been there 20 years are still going to be there. So, thank you.
Malcolm?
Okay, yeah. I'm not as versed on the world of publishing as some of the other people on this stage. I am a poet with one book out, so I'm still learning a lot of things. So most of what I talk about is going to just be around community. And I think it starts out with, one of the things that we're talking about with American Dirt is that obviously, without a doubt, it caused a lot of harm. When we're talking about the ways in which it portrayed immigrants, the ways in which it portrayed what's going on the border, thinking about the ways in which Cummins doubled down on certain things. We've also talked about the barbed wire decorations and how that fed into all of the backlash that it has received. And certainly it's also brought up conversations around advances on whether anyone should ever get a seven-figure advance and how that feeds into myths of scarcity within publishing. As well as this question of, what responsibility we have when we're speaking outside of our own voices and taking on the stories of other people. For me personally, it gets a little complicated for a number of reasons that don't really conflict with anything that has been said up here. But one of the things that immediately stands out to me is some of the praise that the book received from Latinx celebrities, from Latinx authors, from huge literary figures within our own communities. And so I think that one of the questions that get raised with American Dirt is this question of what to do when members of our own communities fail us. Because it's not the first time, it's not going to be the last. Honestly, I'm very used to mainstream publishing, white publishing failing us. It's nothing new, as y'all have pointed out. And it hurts a lot more when people within our own communities are behind some of this. And so one of the questions I think that we have to tackle here, and I have no answers whatsoever for it, is just what do we do with the members of our own communities who have backed the book, who have doubled down on backing the book? How do we have those conversations? How do we address what happens within our own communities when things like this happen? Another thing that sort of complicates this for me is just the fact that Latinx identity encompasses a large range of identities, various regional and national backgrounds, linguistic groups, citizenship status, racial identities, amongst many other identities. And this has come out in the way that, Cummins claims her Puerto Rican grandmother in defense of the book, as if being part of the Puerto Rican diaspora is the same thing as being undocumented, or excuses writing about undocumented immigrants in stereotypical ways. And so on the one hand, I'm glad that one of the outcomes of the reaction to this book is a highlighting of some of our own authors who are writing their own stories, who are giving voice to those stories. Someone who comes to mind for me is Marcelo Hernandez Castillo, who is getting a lot of shine now for his new book, Children of the Land. I'm really glad for that. That one of the outcomes is that now we're saying, okay, but look at this writer as well. Let's see what this writer is doing. On the other hand, I'm wondering, though, how this changes the discussion around communities that umbrella term of Latinx encompasses, particularly the people who are consistently erased, the people who are marginalized within that group. Are we going to fight harder for Central and South American writers and members of those diasporas? Are we going to fight harder for indigenous Latinx and Black Latinx writers? I, of course, am asking that as someone who is a Black Latinx writer, who didn't see myself represented a lot of the times in what people were grouping into Latinx literature. I know this is a 10-year sort of anniversary discussion. 10 years ago, I was finishing up my junior year in high school, and at that point had only read one writer of Puerto Rican descent, William Carlos Williams. Yeah. And so I'm thinking about sort of, again, like how we are talking about our own communities now with American Dirt. And so I'm asking that question with the knowledge that, even at this AWP, there's been some controversy around readings and panels that are geared towards Latinx writers, but don't include Black Latinx writers on them, or did not include Black Latinx writers on them to begin. And so I think one of the things that we are now having to ask with this whole controversy around American Dirt is not just how mainstream literary publishing is treating us, but also how we're treating each other. How we are or are not at times going to bat for those who do not have that voice within publishing, those who very frequently have been excluded even from our own spaces.
Thank you, Malcolm. I was wondering, we have a few minutes, if Deborah or Rigoberto, if either of you wanted to respond to anything that's been said amongst the three of you.
Sure. I'd like to. Certainly, everything you said was very compelling, and those questions have to be raised, questions have to be explored. There's only one thing, though, that I must say bothered me a little bit, is what do we do with the authors that have blurbed this book? And honestly, what can we do? Are we going to tell them to remove their support from the book? Are we going to tell them that I don't think that that's really focusing on the larger issue, right? I think that now, if we're going to build community, to create this kind of punitive response to it, where we're going to say, well, we're going to cancel Sanders Cisneros, which, that's the reason I got off social media. It really was, because I was a little bit tired of this complete negation of what she did for all of us and what her role was. I don't want to just chuck it up to like the young people who don't know, because I think I have more faith in my Latinx community to have this knowledge about who Sandra Cisneros is and what she did. But, that was the only thing that really, I was really uncomfortable with in terms of this whole discussion, because it turned it into kind of, well, if we can't really get to Jeannie Cummings, let's get to Sandra Cisneros, let's get to Erica Sanchez. And I'm not sure that that's very helpful. If anything, that only increased the divisiveness of this issue. And I certainly, as speak for myself, it was one of the reasons that I kind of withdrew. And I'm going to take a long break from everything that I do to reassess. And some of those questions that you raise are important, and I certainly am thinking about those questions too. How do then I come back and be part of something bigger than just what I really think are like some of the smaller issues compared to like the larger ones that we have to really deal with in terms of individual authors. I mean, well, let's look at our communities, and I think that you're very on the mark with that. So so I'm doing that kind of thinking, as the elder, I'm doing that kind of thinking, and in a year, I'll come back and report back, and hopefully I've learned something.
Thank you. Deborah?
I think that I so appreciate the questions that you posed and Rigo's response, because I do feel like, as a very diverse people, we have endured things that are much harder than sitting down and having a really hard conversation with each other, which essentially, so to echo, I think what Rigo is saying is, do I agree with, some of the particular kind of, particular kinds of praise that were perhaps lauded on this book? No. Do I feel like I could benefit from like a really difficult conversation, public or otherwise, amongst our people with one another, even just amongst ourselves? Absolutely. And I think that that's exactly what I think you're asking for, is whether the issue is around Afro-Latino representation or the lack thereof, whether it's about, you blurbed this book and what the hell, but to have it be a space of a beginning as opposed to a space of like, you're canceled, I think that, again, we've survived much harder and accomplished much more difficult things. And so I'm so eager to to have those questions be the place where we begin, as opposed to the place where we sort of put up our defenses and say, that's it, you're out, right? I think that, and to have the questions being posed as you're posing them, which is so refreshing, not as a way to kind of posture about one's woke politics, but as a way to actually forge community, right? Or actually figure out, because of course, it's so ridiculous, the idea that one could say, oh, I have a Puerto Rican grandmother, therefore I can write about Mexicans. I mean, it's like that, the authenticity politics are a problem, and it's not even, an accurate authenticity claim. So I think that for me, is what poses a particular opportunity, right, for us to kind of, even if we don't want to do it amongst other people, right, if we just want to do it amongst ourselves, I think that it's an important moment for that. So I thank you. I thank you both for that.
Did you have any closing thought?
Yeah, I think that as a whole, I think we're still grappling with this question of how to approach someone when they do let us down, how to call them in as opposed to pushing them away. And I do think that there is this large question that's still looming in terms of how we go about that, how we make sure that in our responses, it's not just everyone falling into their own corner, but remembering the communities that we've built and trying to figure out how to make those communities stronger.
I respect that, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think, as I was listening to each one of you talk about this particular topic, I was reflecting and then looking out at the audience, at some of you all who are CantoMundistas. We try to have these conversations in community at our annual retreats, and also in smaller communities, when people come together outside of the retreat. And I don't think that we leave it feeling like it's resolved, it's a work in progress. And one of the reasons why the organization exists is to continue that work. So, the perspectives that each one of you are bringing is important to us working towards finding a better way of being inclusive and a better way of being respectful. And in these moments when we let each other down, having a way that we can talk about that with love and caring and empathy and not do that again, not cause harm again. So thank you all. Thank you all for talking about this topic. The next topic I wanted to move on to, and it's connected a little bit with something each of you all has said, is about the origin, your particular origin story of coming to writing. I think for a lot of people, they think that Latino writing just started in the 1990s with the publication of Sandra's book or some of the other books like by Ana Castillo and other Chicana writers predominantly, because those seem to be the books that were marketed more to the general public and were in our textbooks for many of us growing up. So I really would like for us to rethink that, right? Because we've been, as we said earlier, we've been writing for centuries, and publishing much longer than that too. So if each of you could talk a little bit about your origin story to writing and read a poem, and we'll begin with Deb.
Oh, me again?
Yes, you start, girl.
This is a poem from my book that's just about to come out. And I'm reading it in part because I think embedded in it is my origin story with regards to writing. So I'll talk a bit about that after. It's called Year of the Dog, Walls and Mirrors, fall 1982. And it begins with an epigraph from Maya Lin, who was the designer of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. She writes, "The wall," meaning the memorial, "dematerializes as a form and allows the name to become the object." The English translation of my surname is Walls, misspelled. The original S turned to its mirrored twin, the Z, the beginning of the sound for sleep. I'm nearly 12, and the mirror is a disaster I learn to turn away from. The girl looking back, always looking to extract her pound of flesh. I had a simple impulse to cut into the earth, Maya Lin is writing, as the mirrored wall of names she's made is arranged and laid against the riven hillside. I never looked at the memorial as a wall, she writes, but as an edge to the earth, an opened side. For a wall to become a mirror, it must not absorb or scatter too much light. For a girl to become the protagonist, she must sleep with the guy or until he kisses her awake. Sometimes we know she's the fairest one of all because of the mirror on the wall. Sometimes she must scale the city's walls to bury the guy. Antigone cuts into the earth to give him his proper memorial. She ends up the heroine and buried alive, an in-between thing like someone who's 11 or nearly 12. When I look at the number 11, I see two walls, my name and its mirrored twin. Sometimes 11 resembles the mirrored L's at the end of wall or the beginning of llanto, our word for weeping. Sometimes 11 looks like a pair of railway sleepers arranged and laid along a track that's always leading me back to my war-worn father. Sometimes the guy comes back from battle and has seizures in his sleep and the girl must shake him awake. Sometimes the wall and the name are one and the same. Sometimes the wall is where we end up to begin letting go, our llanto. So for me, I chose to read this poem in part because I grew up much before Malcolm did. And what's that?
Not me?
Not you. Oh, no. I grew up in the 1970s. My father was a Vietnam veteran. He was an immigrant who was handed his citizenship papers just in time for them to give him his draft notice, like many Latinx folks. And the legacy of Vietnam really lived on in our household in the 70s and into the 80s, primarily because it wasn't spoken about, but you know, pervaded in its silences the walls of our home. And I think that I certainly turned to writing as a way to kind of interrogate and speak, kind of shout into the void of that silence, to speak to the legacies of war and violence that absolutely impacted Latino and Latino communities and continue to do so in terms of war. And I think that that was so central to my origin story as a writer, right? Thinking through ideas of race and gender and class in relation to these larger disasters, right? Often state-sponsored or certainly state-supported. And that war is in particular interesting to me because it is both known to be kind of hyper-documented, right? The first time photographers had, you know, kind of embedded, photographers had access to the war in certain ways, but also I think for its complete and enduring silences. And so for me, that's part of where it started.
Thank you. Thank you. Gonna go?
I'm also the year of the dog.
You are?
Yes, can you believe it?
Ooh, excellent.
And now
we can howl together.
Yeah,
at the moon at
well, yeah. But after that, just became the decades of the bitch. You know how it worked. All right. The soldier of Mictlan. Once upon a time, there was a soldier who marched to Mictlan in his soldier boots, and every step was a soldier step, and every breath was a soldier word. Do you know what the soldier said? I like a piece of bread for my soldier hand. I like a slice of cheese for my soldier nose, and I'd like a woman for my soldier heart. The mayor of Mictlan saluted the soldier and bowed his head as he told the soldier, we have no bread, O honorable soldier. We hold empty hands instead. Dear soldier, let us take yours if we may. And the soldier held out his hand to be taken. O brave soldier, said the mayor, cheese is your soldier wish, but we have none since the other soldier left. We whiff empty hands instead. The soldier let the mayor sniff the scent of his soldier palm. And forgive us, O strong soldier, said the mayor, but no woman worthy of soldier warmth lives in our empty town, where your soldier eyes teach us wonder and kindness and soldier love instead. Silence stiffened the soldier face as a search ensued in the soldier head for a moment, one moment of soldier bliss, but all was dead. The longer the soldier looked, the more the streets of his soldier mind resembled the streets that his soldier feet had taken him to, where no lost soldier finds bread or cheese or a woman to be his soldier wife. This was no space for a soldier life, indeed. So off to the hills the soldier fled to seek out the place where a soldier sheds the rattle that beckons a soldier to death, to soldier to death, to soldier. You know, I've written about 3 memoirs about my origin story. So I'll just tell a story, one of those stories. You know, when I was born in the U.S., I was raised in Michoacan, and my family returned to the U.S. when I was 10 years old. And so I always identified as Mexicano, Mexican, right? My community was Mexican, everything was Mexican. We spoke Spanish only at home. So going to college was a big awakening for me because everybody there called themselves Chicano. This is, what year was this? Like 1988 is when I began as a freshman. And so it was hard. I didn't quite feel connected to these folks. These folks came from the cities. I came from a rural area. My parents were migrant farm workers. Many of them did not speak my language, did not speak Spanish, or they spoke a version of it that I would later embrace and accept and actually love, Spanglish or Spanglés. You know? So it wasn't until actually I came across books, and the first book was Tomás Rivera's Y no se tragó la tierra, because it was in Spanish, and 2, because I went to school at UC Riverside, and the library there was called the Tomás Rivera Library because he had been a chancellor who died in office at UCR. So I was curious about this guy. Who is this man, este Mexicano, they named a library after him. I wonder what his story is. And suddenly I felt not only seen, I saw my family's journey in this book about the migrant farm workers. I also noticed and also realized that Tomás Rivera was a hardcore Chicano. He called himself a Chicano. And I thought, well, if Tomás Rivera, this Chicano, was also Mexicano, has a very Mexicano experience, I guess this word has room for me. And once I embraced that word, once I embraced that community, because it was there at UCR, I just didn't feel part of it. I didn't feel like, it didn't feel right somehow for me to be part of that group. And suddenly when this book changed my mind, I realized, okay, well, I think it's fine. And to my surprise, nobody said to me, you're not allowed. Nobody said to me, go, leave, or you're too Mexican. I mean, it was, all the complexities of the word Chicano, which we now see in other terms that we use, were there. So after that, that was my gateway. After Tomás Rivera, then everybody else. I just went to the bookstore, and whatever Latino name I saw, whether Chicano name, Mexican name, whatever, a couple of missteps. But, I discovered that that's where I belonged, and that's where I've been ever since.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Just read a poem from Our Bruises. Prayer es Don Omar. Padre nuestro, que estás en el cielo, santificado sea tu nombre. Venga un dembow, fantasma. Echo of Santurce tin houses banged into existence, castaway music. Every night shouts and bullets bouncing off of bodies, bodies bouncing off of houses, off each other, off the waves, and this is what Oaxaca sounds like. Beach as soundboard, breakage of sand to 3-3-2 snare, grain and drip bien pegado. When a barrio drops the bass line and lights itself like a vela, a rezo, un rosario por lo prieto, took their chains and built those Santurce tin houses, took the leftover scrap metal and tricked it out into loop bling bling. Listen to the slide of their feet as they dance on the ocean's breeze. Put all their weight onto the humidity until the dembow finally drops. So writing for me has always been tied to music and storytelling. I grew up in a household where music was frequently played in the house and stories were told every opportunity we got. My parents tell me the same stories every time I go back home, and most of the time I think of it as, oh, they just forgot that they've told me this story 20 times already. But lately I've started to think about it a little bit differently. I've started to think about it in terms of how important it is to tell and retell our stories as a fight against erasure, as a statement that we're here and that our stories do matter. Either way, this is how I first learned how to write, by listening to my parents and noting the ways they fought for their own survival. By listening to music and noting the ways a voice could layer a story, how the story was as much in how it was told as in what was told. And so in my own writing, this is consistently what I'm trying to keep in mind. I do so by always remembering the way that my parents tell me stories, thinking about the fact that I am as much, as their audience, a participant in those stories as I am a listener. Common phrases during those stories are always, and guess what happened next? And do you believe the nerve? Like, I'm not just someone who's listening, I'm also someone who is actively part of that story. And I'm also keeping in mind some of my favorite singers, whether it's sort of the grit and rasp of Ismael Rivera's voice, or the cool sort of confidence that Marvin Gaye has in a live performance, thinking about sort of how that can come across in the way that I write. I'm going to echo a little bit, a story somewhat similar to yours, Rigoberto, in that so much of how I've come to be a writer has been through what I've had to seek outside of the classroom. Which isn't to say that I didn't gain a lot from my MFA program. I was very fortunate to be at the University of Pittsburgh, to get to study with Yona Harvey, Don Lundy Martin, Terrence Hayes. But so much of what I've learned in terms of Latinx literary traditions and history have had to come outside of what we were reading in class. So I learned by reading Tato Laviera's work as an undergrad in the Vanderbilt Library, by seeing something that seemed like my voice and experience for the first time. I learned by requesting books by Aracelis Garmay and John Murillo through like interlibrary loan in public libraries while I was in grad school. And of course, I'm also keeping an eye on my peers all the time. So I'm seeing what someone like Julian Randall is writing, what someone like Yesenia Montilla is writing, Gabe Ramirez, Ariana Brown, Jessica Lene, Elizabeth Acevedo, Reina Leon, Dianelli Antigua, always thinking about sort of what they're doing, what they're writing, how I can learn from them as well. And of course, I have to give a lot of credit as well to Jasmine Mendez, who not only is writing great work herself, but is doing so much work to highlight what Black Latinx writers are doing, and has sort of taken it upon herself to be someone who is trying to make sure that those voices are heard. And that's something that's really important for me, again, like thinking about the ways in which, even in our school systems, Latinx literary traditions are essentialized and are funneled into as singular an identity as they can get it to be. Yes. And so having people out there who are trying to highlight these literary figures and traditions that don't get to be part of that is something that's really big for me. And so within my own writing, I think I really, and how I came to writing has really been in trying to call attention to those histories, those people that are erased, reminding people that so much of, even just within Puerto Rican culture itself, so much of what we consider Puerto Rican culture wouldn't exist without Black Puerto Ricans, which is why I read that particular poem. And I'm consistently hoping that my writing calls attention to those histories and all the beautiful cultures that are still being built today by people who are cast aside, whether that is cast aside based off of politics, based off of race, based off of gender, based off of all these sort of things that at certain times we say, hey, we're doing better and we fixed it, but we haven't quite actually fixed it yet.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're going to be getting to the last sort of question for all three of you, and then I hope we'll have some time to open up for the audience, hopefully. And Malcolm, if you wouldn't mind beginning, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the impact that CantoMundo has had on you as an individual, but also on the broader U.S., and if you want to talk about international literary landscape.
Okay, yeah. I think I maybe will start big and end small. But yeah, I think that CantoMundo has done a lot of really great work. I am always in awe and grateful at the fact that I have any sort of seat at the table, and to have that community of Latinx writers that I can turn to. In terms of sort of that impact on me personally, so many of the people I listed earlier, I wouldn't know if it weren't for Canto. And even if I knew their work, I wouldn't be able to count them as the family that I count them as today. And so, yeah, for me, individually, I think that Canto has done a lot in terms of allowing me to have that space in order to grow, having that sort of organization behind me, as well as having a family that I can turn to now, that I didn't always have. Yeah, done so much work as well in terms of furthering Latinx letters, thinking about the CantoMundo Book Prize and how big it is to have that as something that is out there for Latinx writers now. And I think that as CantoMundo continues to grow, that's only going to increase. So many more Latinx writers are going to have a chance at community, and I think it's something that is often overlooked, but really should be stressed. Like, to have some sort of institutional support can be extremely important for some people, especially considering the ways in which we've been excluded in the past. To have something there to support us, I think, is really important. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the ways that CantoMundo grows as well. Thinking about, again, all the work that we're doing continually to expand those spaces, to make sure that it's open to as many people as possible. Thinking, again, about all of the different people who aren't always thought about when we say the word Latinx. I was really fortunate my first year at the retreat that Yesenia Montiel was there, Reina Leon was there, and Sandra Maria Esteves was faculty, all Black Latinx writers, and all at one point or another during the retreat came up to me to let me know personally, hey, I'm looking out for you, are you okay, do you need anything? And so I think that as Canto grows, I think it's going to be, that's one of those things that's going to be really important, is making sure that, you know, there is that infrastructure for those who don't always feel that that space is theirs. And I'm looking forward to seeing how that continues to grow. And I think just as importantly, I'm really looking forward to sort of seeing all of the work that CantoMundo continues to do with spaces outside of its own walls, of its own sort of community. In part because there are so many writers that, you know, either don't feel comfortable applying due to certain things, or, you know, have applied but haven't yet got in just because it's like any sort of space, it's a limited space. And so I'm really looking forward to all of the work. I've seen, you know, CantoMundo already doing so much work, reaching out even to other organizations, whether that's Cave Canem, Kundiman, other sort of Latinx organizations locally in other places. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the ways in which that can help build community further, thinking about all of the ways in which CantoMundo is going to be able to reach out to some of those organizations that, you know, contain writers that aren't part of that particular community. How we can further sort of build that and make sure that CantoMundo is part of a larger Latinx community, Latinx literary community.
Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm. Rigoberto?
You know, I'm going to repeat a few things that I said when I first arrived at this incredible space, CantoMundo. You know, I never thought, I knew it was going to happen. I didn't think it was going to happen in my lifetime. I knew that it was going to happen eventually, that this community was going to begin to take a shape that was not only knowing about each other, because that's what we did it before CantoMundo. That's how we did it. We had Continta, of course, where it was just to increase, you know, our gatherings here at AWP. We saw each other, but we didn't have an actual gathering space. So the space began at my hotel room, and catering, and it was just raising money to feed everybody. And then it became something larger. And before that, we had a listserv, Caplica, where some of the same, you know, all the oldies were there, trying to just know about each other, trying to just, because it felt very lonely. You know, can you imagine before social media, it was very lonely to recognize that, oh yeah, there must be a writer somewhere that's probably doing the same thing, having the same thoughts. But I'm in California, they're in New York, and you know, one of my first encounters with that harsh reality was when The Ice Worker Sings by Andres Montoya was published. And it was published at the same time as my book, So After the Pitcher Goes to Water Until It Breaks, same year. And so I thought, oh, you know, I got to write to Andres Montoya, so, because we're like brothers, man. We got these two books, and we got some class issues we're dealing with, and I need to write to Andres Montoya. And I wrote a fan letter to Andres Montoya, and come to find out that Andres Montoya had passed away, you know, but I didn't get the news, so even that. So it was heartbreaking for me, but then I realized, you know, there's got to be, I hope, I said back in the day, I hope there's a way that we can find each other, and we don't all have to be friends, but even just knowing that we exist, just being recognized that way is important. So when CantoMundo began to take shape, I was actually there, I think the first one. to give a little pep talk, you know. And my pep talks are always cranky. I know it surprises people
It was.
that I'm a bit cranky.
Wouldn't have it any other way.
Yeah, but I just, you know, I'm a realist. I'm a realist. And I think that being there, you know, that many years later, was incredibly special and moving. And it was a cry fest from beginning to end. And it was very contagious. I don't think I cried so much, or ever, I think. I don't know, I had tears in me until CantoMundo. But it was incredible to see that, you know, everybody just being excited. And these numbers were incredible to witness, and the enthusiasm and the dreams. And I thought, well, you know, I'm not sure what role I played in this, but I'm going to take credit anyway and say that, you know, I'm glad. And I think my role was that I wished for it. I wished for it. And many people came together to make it true.
Thank you.
Thank you. We heard it. We heard it. You know, it's been a real honor to work with Celeste and Pablo and Norma and Carmen to build this. And I think when I got the call from them, right, you know, do you want to come to Norma's house and we can talk about this thing where we're maybe try to help Latino, writers? And I thought, okay. And I think if I'd known what I was getting into, I don't know if I would have been so eager. At the same time, I feel very strongly that it's important sometimes not to be able to see any farther than where the headlights are in front of you, right? I mean, you still get there, right? Because I feel like I couldn't have possibly even grasped then the tremendous gift that it gave me, right? Which is this community that Rigo dreamed about. I don't even know that I knew to dream that big. A community that constantly keeps me accountable, that constantly teaches me things and inspires me, that I can mess up with and then we can try again, that I can celebrate with, who, I can feel like, right, they want to celebrate me and we want to celebrate one another, and each of our successes doesn't equal or doesn't have to mean the failure of another, right? But in fact, that we really espouse this idea of all boats rising together. It taught me how to be in a space and help hold that space for whatever needs to be present in it. So hence lots of crying sometimes some fighting, lots of time, a lot of love and transformation. It taught me how to really understand, I think in a really deep way, that when we want to do the work, there's no job below us. So as Sarah Gambito always says, and I quote her all the time, one of the founders of Kundiman, you have to try to kick ass and wipe ass, like all the time when you're running an organization, and I think that those things are really important to be able to know, like that's the work of of trying to help us gather together. I do think that not because of the work necessarily we did, but because of the work that I find that our fellows do for each other. It has and it is changing the broader landscape of the publishing world. Just seeing the ways that Rosebud, for example, features so many writers, Rosebud Benoni on Kenyan Review blog, or the way that Emily Perez is constantly reviewing so many of the other of our fellow Canto poets who have books out, the way that you just shouted out so many names so beautifully, and so that's a political act. Seeing again and again how our poets do that is a constant reminder to me that that's the work, that we have to keep doing, no matter if there's, 50 people in the audience or 500, right, that you show up and you do it. So I feel like those are the things that I come away with when thinking about CantoMundo, and that also it's sometimes time to then give it over to the next, generation or the next kind of iteration of leadership. And I'm so excited about the work that that Amy, Sarah Bautista, and Juan Luis Guzman, and Carmen Jimenez Smith, and the Poetry Center, and Diana Marie Delgado are doing to help keep CantoMundo evolving and responding to the particular needs of our communities.
Thank you all so much. I wanted to just briefly say, for me personally, as one of the previous co-directors and a co-founder, that I echo everything that they say, and I also, feel that what CantoMundo has done for me personally, and what I encourage for CantoMundistas and for all of us present is to be advocates for one another and for ourselves and for our writing and for our legacy of the writing and our presence, right? And so a part of that is, I've been looking up at the Jumbotron here and, so like when we're writing our evaluations for AWP and we're kind of like there back at our hotel or back at our house or our apartment and we're like, ay Dios mío, I don't know if I want to fill out this cosa, that we put comments like, for our panels where, where we feel that we're going to have other languages spoken, we can put a request to have the closed captioning in those languages as well. Yes. So we don't see just Spanish spoken, right? For like some of the names or some of the parts of our poetry, right? That are in Spanish. So I think that for me, that's the one takeaway that I have is that we have a presence. It's not like, like my mother would always tell me like, ay, no seas así, don't be like that. Like you need to be very friendly and nice. And there's nothing wrong about asserting our voice, and our voice is in many languages and many histories, and that we're part of the conversation. We are presente, even in these institutions. So that was, I would just want to close that section just by saying that, encouraging you to be active and present in that way. Because I do feel that the organizations, many of them are open, and we have to challenge that openness. Just as we internally in the organization have been challenged and will continue to be challenged, it's important for us to do that with our other peers, our writing peers. So we have some time for a few, maybe like one or two questions. The lights are here in my eyes, so it may be a little difficult for me to see you, so you might want to stand if you have a question, and I will do my best to, respond to you and call on you. So does anybody have a question that they would like to ask anybody on the panel or the panel in general?
They're a shy group.
Yes. It's okay. Yes, I was going to say right over here. Go right ahead. And hi.
Can you just repeat the question a
Yeah,
little bit?
I was actually going to ask, is there any way that we can get the question, because we're very far away, and so there are parts of it that I
Is
missed.
there a mic?
Yes.
Oh, there is a mic.
TJ has
Thank you
saved
so
us.
much.
Thank you, TJ.
Thank you, TJ.
Thank you, TJ.
Thank you, TJ.
This is TJ. Thank you,
And also
TJ.
identify yourself since you're
Thank you,
new.
Malcolm.
Yeah.
Thank you, Malcolm.
Hi, so I'm sorry I didn't get your name, but I've been reading a lot of poetry and nonfiction and fiction by new Latinx writers, and I've seen perreo come up a lot in a lot of people's writing, and I was wondering if you could comment on sort of like what do you think compels people to include it in literature, something that sort of, I don't know, I feel like it's something.
Okay. Okay. So to answer your first question, my name is Malcolm Friend, and I'm just going to make sure that I heard that right, that what you're seeing included is perreo?
Pereo?
Okay.
Pe-
Sorry, yeah, that's why I laughed a little bit.
Okay.
I think one reason may be just that, and especially now as hip hop and reggaeton become things that are more so turned to by writers, it's something that's gonna show up more in writing, something that people have felt themselves more so represented in at times. I know there's been a lot in Puerto Rico right now with regards to how it gets used in terms of protest as well. And so there are a lot of politics laid in there in terms of how it's being used to speak to power as well. Honestly, I could not give you a concrete answer as to that. The best that I could do is just say that folks are turning to what they know, are turning to what has made them feel themselves, what has made them feel comfortable. And I think a lot of those barriers, in large part because of all of the writing that has been done in like the last 20 years or so, a lot of those barriers in terms of what we can include in literature are breaking down a little bit more.
So we have room, time for one more question before our closing.
Hi, this is for Malcolm too. Okay, my question is kind of related, not about perreo, but I wanted to ask you, how is your relationship to Puerto Rico? And because recently really the conversation for a lot of Puerto Ricans has been post-hurricane.
Right.
So how has that impacted your writing at all? And yeah, I guess perreo is like like in Puerto Rico, perreo is has been a thing that we've used for protest. I was there this last summer, and I just wanted to know, how you felt about your connection to Puerto Rico. I don't know if you're connected to people in Puerto Rico. I know a lot of us in the diaspora are really Americans or Boricuas. So I wanted to know a little bit about how your relationship and sort of how that affects your writing. And also, another question, if you have time, is how is being Black and Latinx and Boricua been when you're in spaces like San Antonio, where it's like a lot of the conversation for Latinx here is Mexican. And so how do you answer to that? How do you navigate it? How do you respond when you're also, not only are you Black, but then you're Boricua, so you're not Mexican. So how does that work for you when you're in these sort of Latinx spaces where you're already excluded and then excluded again? You know what I mean? Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Wow, those are great questions. No, thank you. So with regards to that first part in terms of my relationship to Puerto Rico, I was born and raised in Seattle, so I was about as far away as you can get in this country. And so I also, not gonna go too much into it, but my family did not have a lot of money when I was growing up. And so trips to the island were non-existent for my family a lot of the time. I've since been, but I'm always thinking about that in terms of how I write about communities, because I think that by that same token, we talking about sort of the differences in how wide-ranging those identities can be. Even me being someone of Puerto Rican descent, there are so many things that I don't get because I did not grow up in Puerto Rico. I'm not from there. I have ties there, but it's not my home. And so there are so many things that I have to be careful about and responsible about when I'm writing. And I think that actually, as you brought up, like Hurricane Maria brought up a lot of that. So thinking about what it is to write, to talk about Hurricane Maria as someone who is seeing it affect his family as opposed to being directly affected by it in his everyday life. So it's certainly something that I'm consistently thinking through, sort of how I responsibly write about that, how I note my place as someone as part of the Puerto Rican diaspora as opposed to someone straight from Puerto Rico, and I should say archipelago instead of island. There to note places like Vieques, like Culebra, that also get ignored just within that structure. With regards to your second question, this is one of the reasons, unfortunately, Jasmine Mendez could not be at the conference this year. She is someone who actually grew up here in San Antonio, and she's Dominican. And so this is actually something that she's been talking to a number of us about, is sort of what it was like to not be counted, to be erased from that population. She also talks about how that happens. She lives in Houston now and talks about that, how that happens there as well. All of the different ways in which she has to navigate. And so I think that one of the ways in which that affects me is that a lot of the times, to be completely honest, a lot of the times I do feel more comfortable around other Black Latinx people because I don't have to explain myself. I don't have to worry about not being counted. I don't have to worry about being erased. But also, it comes up in, the folks, and there are a few of them here in the audience right now, who are also doing that work, who are also making sure to speak up, to make sure to address all of the issues that we have within our own communities. And so I think that it becomes a matter of me more so seeking out the places where I do feel comfortable, as opposed to consistently trying to get into spaces where I don't feel comfortable.
Thank you. Thank you, Malcolm. Any other questions? Okay, I think,
I know, right?
oh, can we introduce ourselves one by one more time? Yes, I'll be doing that in our closing. Thank you. And I think we had one here in the front. One here in the front, TJ. Well, he's coming. He's coming. Oh. Oh, ahí
Right here,
viene.
get the mic.
So it was a dream of the organizers for CantoMundo to be at AWP in 2020. I don't know if you actually were working towards that 10 years ago. I think it was what you were hoping. What are your dreams 10 years from now? Now that you've actually met this goal, I mean, how does that feel? And what are your thoughts, each of you, for what you hope CantoMundo will evolve to in 2030?
Which one of you would like to answer that?
You.
I'll go.
And we have a
I can-
total of
3 minutes?
3 minutes.
Okay, I'll go
4
fast.
minutes, so go fast.
I can go fast.
Thank you.
I think my goal was, so the 2020, it's bittersweet, right, what's happened, because, yes, it would have been great to have a more robust, folks here. But I also feel like our goal was also never just to be accepted by the structures that exist. I don't care if our community is always, going to be published in the New Yorker any more than I care about them creating a literary magazine that is, for us, by us, right? I mean, so for me, it's not about like, oh, if we achieve X, Y, and Z and are finally seen by X, Y, and Z, establishment, then somehow we've made it. I mean, I feel like I've always wanted, and I think I share that with my co-founders, wanted to think beyond that, and hence the creation of the group. In 2020, I would love for us to have even more, organizations or whatever that looks like, that are continuing to just perhaps not have to bother with the establishment, right? That we've created new ways of being that continue to question and provide alternative means of evaluation and affirmation for our writing.
Thank you.
Why don't you go ahead, Nathan?
Yeah, I think I'll mostly echo some of the stuff that I said earlier, and just that I hope those doors are being broken down for more and more people. That we do see more Black Latinx, more Indigenous Latinx people, and even thinking about, people who, who speak languages other than Spanish and even English,
Sure.
how we're, breaking doors down for those people. Would love to see that community continue to grow and continue to represent more people.
Thank you.
I'm good.
All right, well, thank you all so much. I wanted to just say some closing comments. I want to thank our panelists today. Please give a round of applause for them. And I want to, I'm Celeste Mendoza, and this is Deborah Paredes, Rigoberto Gonzalez, Malcolm Friend. And I wanted to especially thank Rigoberto and Malcolm because before we had the situation with the COVID, Willie Perdomo and Denise Froman were going to be serving on our panel. They both are in New York, and they weren't going to be able to come. And so literally like 48 hours ago, we asked Malcolm and Rigoberto, and they said yes because they were going to be here. So I want to thank them very much for apartando el tiempo ahí, just taking their time to be present with us. So thank you all. Thank you. I want to give a shout out to the Poetry Center, who is providing sponsorship of this panel, and also our new co-directors, and Deborah mentioned them, Amy Sayer Bartista, Juan Luis Guzman, and Carmen Jimenez Smith. And Amy and Juan Luis have been working tirelessly, as many changes have happened in the past couple of days, as the AWP staff have, and many of the people who are helping to this conference happen, this year. I want to encourage all of you all to visit the CantoMundo booth that's in the book fair to learn more about CantoMundo. Every year, we would get more and more applicants. Every year, there's about 10 to 12 spaces. And what we saw happening the first year, there was about 35 to 40 applicants. And by year 10, we were getting over 100 applicants. And so, it's wonderful for those that you'll see that are named fellows, but I always ask people to remember that there's every year like another 80 or so writers that also applied and are also writers and that are publishing their work, performing their work, and they are still part of our community, though they may not be selected to come to the retreat. And I encourage you to be thinking about the spaces that you encompass. Something that's been mentioned here is about power and about the power you have if you are somebody that is creating these readings, spaces for readings, as well as creative work, and thinking about the questions that Malcolm posed. And so I'm encouraging everybody to be cognizant of that. And then the last thing I just wanted to share is, apply to CantoMundo if you haven't come to the community yet, and you can, like I said, go to the booth. You can look on cantomundo.org to learn more about that application process. And thank you so much for being here.
And
We
I
really
just
appreciate it.
want to thank Celeste Mendoza, who, as always, did all kinds of work behind the scenes to make sure that this happened and to make us all sound as good as we could possibly sound, and really for all the work you constantly do. Glamorous.
Thank
and
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all so much. So have a great rest of AWP, and we should bless this space. So one thing we do at CantoMundo is, when I say canto, you say mundo. So we should do that, no? For Lila Cockrell. I think the spirit of Lila Cockrell is like, she needs to hear it, no?
Yeah.
So, canto!
Mundo!
Canto!
Mundo!
Canto!
Mundo!
Eso. Thank you all so much. Have a good rest of your afternoon.
Good job, man.
Thank you.